What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and this is going to be another one of my rulings videos, just going over a lot of the major rulings that you need to know in a given format. And the format I want to cover this week is Treasure format. Treasure format has recently been included on the format library website, which is really exciting to see, and so I figured this would be the perfect time to celebrate by putting out this video. Now, depending on the community that you play Treasure in, some people define Treasure as including Tournament Pack 2 and thus Morphing Jar in the format as legal cards. Some communities don't. In YGO from Zero, we don't actually include Morphing Jar and Tournament Pack 2 as legal cards, as we're sort of viewing Tournament Pack 2 as something that people would have to play a tournament of Treasure for to get, so it doesn't really make sense to put Morphing Jar and those other cards into the Treasure decks. But, you know, different people will play with Morphing Jar, and that's something to keep in mind if you're playing this format in a given community. Make sure to check whether Morphing Jar is legal or not, because it drastically changes the format. But no matter what version of Treasure format you play, it's played with the October 2002 limited list, and it also includes cards up to Magic Ruler at least. So those new Magic Ruler cards introduce some new rulings that you should know, and that's why I want to cover them today. Now, as another note, there are some important cards that are still relevant from Critter format that I discussed the rulings for in my Critter format video, namely Cannon Soldier, Sangan, and Witch. The interactions still apply the same way they did back in Critter, so check out that video if you're interested in that. But for this video, I'm going to be focusing on the new cards that were released in Treasure format. If you want to see any Treasure format gameplay, then I've got tons of videos covering the format on my channel, so definitely check them out. And if you like what I do here, definitely subscribe. We're at around 635 subscribers last I checked. I'd really like to reach 700 by the end of the month, so you subscribing would help me do that. Also, if you want to play Treasure or any other format that I feature on the channel for yourself, we have a Discord server linked in the description down below, but it's a great place to find games in these obscure and underexplored formats. And lastly, as always, if you enjoy the video, please do leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel a lot. But with all that out of the way, let's dive into the new rulings that Treasure introduced. So the big one that comes up all the time is quick play spells. Now, the modern way the quick play spells work is that if you set them, you can't actually activate them afterwards that turn. You have to wait until your opponent's turn and beyond. In Treasure format, however, and some of the other formats following Treasure format, you can actually use quick play spells the turn they're set. It feels kind of weird if you're coming at it from a modern perspective, but it does work this way in the format, and oftentimes it can make blind sniping back row a lot riskier. As your opponent sets a Mystical Space Typhoon and you fire a Mystical Space Typhoon of your own to try and get rid of their back row, they can then chain the Mystical Space Typhoon that they set. So it's a very interesting ruling, and it does often come up, so it's a very good one to know about. Moving on to another very confusing ruling that does come up against certain types of decks, we've got Spear Cretin. Now, Spear Cretin is a flip monster that when sent to the graveyard after being flipped, each player selects one monster from their graveyard and special summons it in face-up attack position or face-down defense position. And as a note, this flip effect can be activated and used even if you or your opponent does not have a monster in graveyard to summon off this. This can often make it very useful in the early game. If you've set up a powerful flip monster in graveyard and your opponent doesn't have any monsters in grave, you can use Spear Cretin to recycle your monster at no benefit to your opponent. However, this doesn't come up too often, but it does come up, so it's very good to know about. Moving on to a much less confusing card that probably sees more play than Spear Cretin does, we've got Mystic Tomato. Now, Mystic Tomato is a staple in a variety of decks in the format. Just being able to recruit out your dark monsters from deck is so powerful, and there are some interesting interactions that can happen with this card. The main one being, if your opponent has a Mystic Tomato and you crash yours into theirs, you both will get to search out a monster from your deck and special summon them. But the order in which that happens is very important to know. If two tomatoes are crashing, then the non-turn player is the one that has to summon out from their deck first. And then after they do that, the turn player can summon out. This is very important because oftentimes, you want to see what your opponent is going to bring out before you bring out a monster of your own, just so you can sort of play around it a little bit. And so it's very good to know the order in which that actually happens. And lastly, coming back to another very confusing card, we've got Cyberjar. Now, a lot goes on with Cyberjar's effect. It destroys all monsters on the field. Then each player sort of reveals the top 5 cards of their deck and special summons all the revealed level 4 or lower monsters to the field, either face-up attack or face-down defense. And the important thing to know about Cyberjar is that the turn player is actually the one that special summons out first with this. Don't ask me why. It's a very weird ruling. I don't quite get it. I assumed that it would work like Mystic Tomato does. But no, for Cyberjar, it is the turn player that specials first. So that's very good to know about. Oftentimes, seeing what your opponent does have, you can sort of guess what they're going to do in terms of setting versus summoning. But there are situations where it can come up. And that's going to do it for the treasure rulings. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there are some rulings from previous formats like Critter that still are relevant, like Cancel's Priority, Sangan and Witch using their pre-errata card text, etc. But these rulings have stayed the same from the previous formats, so you can check out my previous rulings videos on those. But let me know down in the comments below in case I missed any rulings that you think are very important for this format. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.